Okay, it's 10:02. Um, good morning. Do we have the slide deck up?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, good morning. Welcome to this Voluntary California Clean Construction Program Development Informational Session. This informational session is being recorded and will be posted to the CARB website at a later point. We're going to begin with a couple of quick introductions. First, we have with us the Chief of the Mobile Source Regulatory Development Branch here at California Air Resources Board, Kim Rogalski.
Thank you, Holmes. Good morning, everybody. And thanks a lot for joining us. We're really excited to be here. So, as many of you are probably aware, since the mid 90s, CARB and US EPA have had new emission standards aimed at cutting harmful emissions from off-road equipment. Beginning nearly 20 years ago, in 2007, CARB adopted the in-use off-road reg aimed at further accelerating the turnover to newer, cleaner diesel equipment. And our latest push is really to encourage the use of zero-emission construction equipment wherever possible. There are a couple elements within the existing in-use off-road diesel rule that give fleets extra credit if they do embrace zero-emission technology. So we're super excited about that, and we're super excited about this new proposal for a voluntary program that would give some recognition to projects that are going above and beyond and really embracing zero-emission equipment. So just want to encourage everyone, please don't be shy. Please give us your ideas and thoughts. If you don't want to speak here in front of everybody and on the recording, please feel free to reach out to us separately afterwards. The more input we get, the better program we can develop and implement. So back to you, Holmes.
Excellent. I'm not sure we need the informational session anymore. That was so good. Thank you to everyone in attendance. My name is Holmes Bassett, and I, along with the team working to host this informational session, will work in the off-road section. We work in the off-road implementation section at CARB. So again, welcome to the California Air Resources Board's public informational session to discuss the development of the California Clean Construction Program. If you have questions or comments, please wait for the discussion period and then use the question and answer feature to share your question. Or if you joined us by phone, please use the raise hand function or #2. In all cases, please include or state your name and affiliation before asking your question or making a comment. We are looking forward to your feedback, thoughts, and suggestions during the comment period. Here's an outline of what I'll be discussing today. I'll start by sharing the intended purpose of the program and some relevant background regarding existing emission certifications and CARB's existing programs. Next, I'll present the proposed program concepts, then the timeline, next steps, and context and resources, followed by open discussion. This open discussion period will be your opportunity to ask questions and share your thoughts and feedback. We look forward to a robust discussion and even have some examples of questions to share. So please hold your questions and comments until the open discussion following the presentation. Program purpose. Like Kim mentioned, our communities continue to have concerns about emission impacts from off-road equipment, especially when that equipment is near sensitive receptors or neighbors' populated properties for construction or development project. The 2022 State Implementation Plan strategy included a commitment to develop a voluntary, non-monetary incentive program that encourages off-road equipment fleets to go above and beyond existing regulatory fleet compliance and adopt advanced technology equipment with a strong emphasis on zero-emission equipment. Today is a continuation of this effort to provide a program that encourages the reduction of off-road equipment construction project-related emissions and promotes zero-emission off-road construction equipment. This program is intended to encourage the replacement of diesel construction equipment with zero-emission equipment at project sites and reward fleets for utilizing zero emission by either awarding or providing favorable scoring eligibility for construction contracts utilizing the program. Let's begin with a little background, including current and existing efforts and resources to address emissions from off-road equipment. I'm kicking it off with emission standards. California's new off-road engine emission standards. For new off-road equipment to be sold legally in California, the engines must meet emission standards. Currently, California's and the United States Environmental Protection Agency's standards are identical, meaning they are harmonized. Diesel particulate filters, or DPFs, capture toxic diesel particulate matter before it can be emitted. In meeting today's particulate matter PM standard for 56 to 560 kilowatt engines, about half of California engine families are certified without DPFs. The European Union has its own non-road emission standards. They're called Stage 5, which were implemented in 2019. The Stage 5 standards require non-road engines to meet a PM standard along with additional particle number, a PN, limits specifically for non-road engines 19 to 560 kilowatts. The European Stage 5 PN standard requires all new engines to be equipped with a DPF. If more manufacturers brought off-road engines with DPFs to California, that would further reduce the toxic diesel particulate matter emissions. The current off-road in-use diesel-fueled fleet regulation overview. Currently, diesel off-road or non-road vehicles, 25 horsepower or greater, are generally subject to the in-use off-road diesel-fueled fleet regulation or off-road regulation. The purpose of the off-road regulation is to reduce oxides of nitrogen, diesel particulate matter, and other criteria pollutant emissions from vehicles subject to the regulation. The California Environmental Quality Act, CEQA generally requires state and local government agencies to inform decision makers and the public about the potential environmental impacts of proposed projects and to reduce those environmental impacts to the extent feasible. We're hoping we recognize that there is a potential that this program may be able to be incorporated or utilized as a CEQA mitigation measure. Zero emission projects. Projects are utilizing zero emission equipment are occurring at an increasing frequency. A few examples include the California High-Speed Rail Authority's zero emission construction equipment requirements for Fresno early activation projects, Los Angeles Metro's Purple D-Line Extension Transit Project, and Turner Construction's Berkeley project. Increasing equipment availability resources to help raise awareness of available zero-emission equipment, including but not limited to the following examples. CARB's Advanced Clean Off-Road Equipment lists over 360 zero-emission construction equipment. The Drive to Zero Off-Road Zero-Emission Technology Inventory lists 48 different original equipment manufacturers with 80 different zero-emission equipment models. So now we get to the fun stuff. Here's the proposed program concept. The proposed program concept is a way to encourage the use of more zero emission and cleaner than required off-road equipment, an opportunity to build familiarity with and acceptance of such equipment, and a means to enable project proponents interested in reducing construction-related emissions to do so. This proposed program concept would be simple to incorporate in construction project conditions, as it would require a minimum threshold lower limit of 35% of available zero emission off-road equipment, while the remaining off-road construction equipment would be Tier 4 final plus a DPF or B hybrid. The program would be a project condition declaration in the project proposal or potentially incorporated as a CEQA mitigation measure. The proposed program would be project-based, be flexible, would provide familiar program reference conditions, and potentially be considered as a CEQA mitigation measure. So the program process. For this program, the awarding body or lead agency would determine the minimum zero emission equipment threshold appropriate for their project, which wouldn't be less than 35% of available equipment, but could be greater than 35%, depending on the awarding body or lead agency. The project plan identifies the anticipated equipment list, the commercially available zero-emission equipment list, and the sale, rental, and lease availability of the equipment. Including additional information such as estimated power demands and charging and fueling planning is commonplace and would be strongly recommended. The contractor would agree upon condition of the bid, proposal, or other related submittal to provide the conditioned equipment as determined by the awarding body or CEQA lead agency. How it works. The project would incorporate the California Clean Construction Guidelines and declare the minimum eligibility threshold of zero-emission mobile equipment for their project. The project's anticipated off-road equipment list would be checked against a publicly available database for available eligible equipment, so a publicly available database of zero-emission equipment. The contractor would agree upon condition of the bid to provide a minimum of the program threshold equipment, with the remainder of the equipment being Tier 4 final plus DPF or hybrid. To reiterate, while the guidelines would lay out the program implementation details, the program would be implemented and enforced by the awarding body or lead agency. CARB would be available to provide support, answer questions, and receive feedback to improve the program. This structure creates the flexibility for both the contractor and the awarding body or lead agency. An example project calculation. For an example of a project calculation, let's assume a California clean construction project anticipates the need for 10 off-road construction equipment. From the 10 anticipated equipment identified, 7 are identified as being available in a zero-emission equipment version. Since the proposal is based on the number of equipment, 3 zero-emission equipment would satisfy 43% of the available 7 equipment. The project equipment that isn't zero emission would be Tier 4 final with a DPF or hybrid. $35 threshold for project participation. Projects can select minimum requirements greater than 35% to satisfy their project goals. As a reminder, ACE lists more than 360 zero-emission equipment, and Drive to Zero OZETI lists 40-plus zero-emission original equipment manufacturers, and the number of zero-emission equivalent construction equipment continues to grow. But we recognize that not all construction equipment is currently available as zero-emission. That's why we are incorporating what's available as the numerator for the calculation of the minimum threshold. But what does available mean? The equipment originally identified in the anticipated equipment list is evaluated for availability as zero-emission equipment. The zero-emission equipment identified comprises the available equipment. Additionally, CARB would expand the program webpage to include program guidelines, example language templates available for inclusion in requests for bids and proposals, and example language templates as CEQA mitigation measure responses to project proposals. So we anticipate that this voluntary California Clean Construction Program would be a tool to reduce emissions at construction sites for the benefit of the health of construction workers and the neighboring communities and environments. There are a number of organizations and agencies that have expressed the desire to reduce their emissions at construction sites. Plus, this program would also be a contributing strategy toward fulfilling the governor's executive order N7920 with the zero emission goal set for 2035. In a moment, we will start the open discussion and accept questions and feedback. Listed here are some of the potential discussion topics. Please feel free to use these or add your own. But before we get to the open discussion, let's continue the presentation with the timeline and next steps. For our timeline and next steps, by the end of 2025, you can go one more. Marjorie. By the end of 2025, we anticipate finalizing the program criterion, meaning we'll be publishing voluntary program guidelines that includes things like a reference for what is considered available equipment and a description of what qualifies as a hybrid, and providing associated draft template language for incorporating the program into construction project conditions would also be posted to CARB's website. Following the program publication, a wide-spanning statewide outreach effort is anticipated and would include private and public organizations and entities, including off-road equipment fleet operators and public and private partnerships. At any time during the program development, feedback can be shared, and we'll share those addresses here in just a moment on an additional slide. So resources and incentives. We would like to encourage manufacturers to ensure their commercially available equipment is listed on CARB's zero emission equipment list. Please feel free to promote the list as a resource similar to others such as the ones mentioned, Drive to Zero, ACE. There's also Bologna.org, also has a list of zero emission equipment, construction equipment. We also want to raise awareness of the in-use off-road diesel-fueled fleet regulations zero-emission promotional measures. These are very cool measures where the delay of a tier phase-out for addition of zero-emission vehicles allows you to add zero-emission equipment and in turn be able to hold onto a piece of internal combustion diesel equipment. We also have the alternate compliance pathway through zero-emission technology application, and that is when you take a holistic look at your fleet and try to achieve 50% of your fleet's horsepower as zero emission by 2035. We'd also like to increase the awareness of incentive options, eligibility, and availability to smaller organizations or fleets that may not have had previous exposure to the incentives. Finally, additional resources and contact information. If you can't stick around for the open discussion, we will welcome your feedback at any time at any of the 3 emails: doors@arb.ca.gov, ccc@arb.ca.gov, or my own email, which is holmes.bassett@arb.ca.gov. Given our ambition to publish the program criteria by the end of 2025, the sooner the feedback can be provided, the more we would appreciate it. For anyone who has to leave at this point, thank you for your attendance and interest. And for those of you remaining, as a reminder, please put your comments and questions in the Q&A or raise your hand if joining us by phone, and that's #2. And don't forget to include your name and affiliation. And Marjorie, if you can return to slide 20, we'll go ahead and open the discussion.
Okay, we have some questions. I see Grant Stickney. I will unmute yourself. Let us know the organization you represent. We look forward to your comments. Hi, Grant Stickney. Could you unmute yourself and ask your question and state your organization? We can go back to you. Is there anybody else in attendance that would like to talk? Okay. Brian Kwok, please unmute yourself and let us know the organization you represent. We look forward to your comments.
Okay, found the settings, so a little difficult. for the other person, just go to settings and then you can unmute yourself. This is Brian Kwok with ANA Energy. We produce a hybrid generator with energy storage system. And I guess the question would be, we have data based on fuel savings and emission savings. Should there be a minimum requirement for CO2 or PM savings based on power output? So, for instance, a system with a 25 kVA generator and energy storage puts out somewhere around 20 kilowatts of power. I would recommend that probably be the minimum at 20 kW up to maybe 400 kW. So just putting that out there, and hopefully we can work together to provide enough field data. We do have about 2 years worth of data for our hybrid system, and there's really significant savings thus far.
Thank you, Brian. Appreciate that.
Brian, can I ask a follow-up? So Kim Horowidelski, branch chief here, and we actually do have another team that's looking really closely at generator emissions and the fuel savings and emission savings that can occur if you use battery energy storage systems like what you mentioned. So can you elaborate a little bit? So in the concept that Holmes laid out, we would be, a certain construction project would qualify for California Clean Construction if they have a certain amount of ZE and they have DPFs. What additional requirement would you have for any generators that are used at the site? How would you recommend we structure that?
Sure. Hi, Kim again. This is Brian. I think we met in Sacramento, but yeah, we're working with Matt and June on providing some data. We're going to give enough data so they can see where. Excuse me. There's a helicopter going by. There's going to be enough data where we could see where there are some thresholds. And I know that was one of my other questions was how are these two groups going to kind of work together? Yeah, we're trying to provide enough data where we can set some minimum thresholds for the PACE kind of program. And if we can kind of get that information to both teams, then we can kind of present something for, these are 25 kVA generators and there's a ton of them out there. How can we then add a hybrid solution to existing generators until they get to a point of useful life, and then replace that with newer technology and move on from there up to, let's say, 400 kW. There's a lot of construction sites now that are requiring more power, yet we want to incorporate kind of a hybrid solution so they don't, idle for long periods of time, and they're only running at its most peak efficient threshold. So yeah, that's kind of hopefully that answers some of your questions, Kim. But we do have a lot of data, and it's just how we crunch the data. There's a lot of information on the load, where the average load is for a specific generator classification, and then there are spikes. So we want to know, okay, what period of time did it go up to, 80%, and what is that time? Is it 5 minutes, 20 minutes? Was it an hour per day? So we're trying to give enough data so we can give a better picture of how a lot of these units are being utilized in the field.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Okay, we are going to return back to Grant Stickney. Please unmute yourself. Let us know the organization you represent. We look forward to your comments. Uh, Grant, so if you're having issues with unmuting yourself, you can post your question to the Q&A section and we can respond to your question there. Okay, I'm going to move on to Michael Lewis. Um, Please unmute yourself. Let us know the organization you represent. We look forward to your comments.
Hi, thank you. Good morning. Mike Lewis. I'm with the Construction Industry Air Quality Coalition. I guess I wanted to take a step back for a minute and just ask a couple of basic questions. I'm assuming that this, as this is designed right now, would apply to equipment that's basically between 25 horsepower and 175 horsepower. Um, or equivalent based on your kilowatt numbers. Um, and I guess I wanted to ask, number one, if that's correct, and secondly, have you looked at the doors data recently to look at what the makeup of the existing off-road fleet is, in terms of numbers of equipment, amount that's zero emission, or amount that's Tier 4 final? Just to know how the fleet has transitioned from the beginning to today.
Sure. Thank you, Michael. Appreciate the question. Um, we are looking at 25 horsepower or greater for the construction equipment. And we do already understand out of doors. When I last looked in December, there were over 400 fleets that already had 35% or more of their fleet composition horsepower as zero emission. And the big asterisk there is there's not a requirement to report your zero emission equipment indoors. So these are voluntary reports, voluntary inclusions into their doors reporting systems. So there could be more. We just, since we don't require the zero emission equipment to be entered into doors, it it means we may not have a great picture of what's available or what's incorporated already out there. But we do have a general idea that it is being adopted and that we do have at least 400 fleets with a significant proportion of their horsepower as zero emission.
And do you know what type of equipment that is? What horsepower size equipment is it? The lower end, or is it the at the higher end? Um,
I don't have that information handy right now.
okay.
Yeah.
Well, let me ask a couple other questions.
Sure.
Number one, what kind of emissions benefit is there if you add a particulate filter to a Tier 4 final equipment that didn't need it to meet the standard, and also uses renewable diesel?
So we've got a very talented staff here to help you out with that. Um, Jenna, would you like to address that one?
Yeah, I can take that one. So there is evidence that DPF equip. Let me turn on my video. All right. There is evidence that shows that DPF equipped, you know, diesel engines show greater long-term PM control than non-DPF controlled ones. And so we're trying to incentivize equipment that does have DPFs because right now 50% of the equipment do not have DPFs on them.
I understand that, and I guess my understanding is the equipment that doesn't have the DPS tends to be at the very lower end of the horsepower ranges, and I guess that would tell me that that's smaller equipment, and I guess the question would be how how easy is it to install a DPF on the small equipment where there isn't space or there isn't a
Hmm.
place to put it. I mean, that's the same problem we had when DPS first started and we were trying to do a retrofit program
Yeah.
that there was just any place to put it without blocking the vision or some other problem. And I'm assuming the manufacturers designed them that way so they didn't have to deal with DPFs. And I would suggest that, talking to my contractors, half of the service calls and the attention that they have to give to this equipment in the field is trying to maintain the DPFs and the emission systems. So they're problematic, and I'm assuming that's one of the reasons why there's been an effort to design these things without DPFs because of the maintenance problems with and trying to keep them operating.
So just to address a couple of your questions, so there are different emission standards based on the power bin. So for example, the 19 to 56 has a higher PM standard than does the 56 on up to 560 that has a lower PM standard. But nonetheless, there's quite a bit of equipment in the 19 to 56 range that this program is covering that do have DPFs. And so we've done an analysis, and what we've seen is more engine manufacturers are producing what we call dual certified engines or even tri-certified engines that have certification from um, the European Union, their European Union Stage 5 certified engines that have DPFs on them between 19 and 56, that smaller category, as well as for the larger engines. Even, I mean, I consider 56, as a small one as well, but those have DPFs on them. So we're seeing the migration of more engines manufacturers moving towards having this equipment with designing this equipment with DPFs. But I appreciate your feedback, and we'll take that under consideration.
So Mike, can I follow up a little bit? And thanks for your
Sure.
comment. And so folks know Mike and his organization were super active during the original development of the new off-road reg. So I really appreciate you being here, giving us your thoughts. So do you think if we set this up, Mike, are you suggesting that we shouldn't have that requirement to have DPFs on everything? Like, do you think that would dissuade people from participating? What are your thoughts?
Well, I think it's probably problematic. I mean, number one is you're talking about retrofitting a piece of equipment that wasn't designed with that in mind in the first place. And I don't know how, if the recent DPFs have gotten smaller and easier to install, but I'm assuming that the manufacturers made a decision to try to design the equipment to meet the standard without it because there wasn't any place to put it, especially on the smaller horsepower equipment. Um, which is, as my understanding, is the equipment that doesn't really have it on it. The bigger equipment does because because of the sheer horsepower and fuel consumption that needs a DPF to be able to meet the standard. So um, I guess that's question number one is if this is a retrofit for a device that didn't need it. And my understanding was that using renewable diesel in a tier 4 final piece of equipment um, didn't really the renewable didn't gain you that much in an emissions reduction because of the tier 4 final levels being so low. And the renewable was really for everything else to try to bring those emissions down. And as the fleets transitioned to tier 4 final, you're not getting a benefit from the renewable. So I'm just wondering how much additional benefit can you actually get with a DPF on top of a Tier 4 final with renewable diesel in it, which is presumably as low as you can technically get the emissions now. So I guess for the dollars that we're talking about that it's going to take to retrofit this equipment, is it worth it in terms of the emission, the delta uh, reduction in emissions? Number one, and number two, what the cost is. I mean, you haven't talked about what it's going to cost somebody to retrofit one of these pieces of equipment, and at this point, you're looking at what 65% of the fleet needing to be retrofitted to.
Yeah, I'm sorry to interrupt. Let me just jump in there. And I'm so glad you pointed out that you were thinking about it this way because I think maybe we weren't as clear as we intended to be. So we're not thinking about retrofits. What we were thinking about is about half the equipment is sold new with DPFs. So we were thinking for someone that wants to do a project and wants to get this recognition for California clean construction, that they would either, send the pieces of their equipment that have the DPFs to that project. If they didn't have one, they could rent one with the DPF. So we weren't thinking about any kind of retrofitting. I think there's broad availability of equipment coming new with DPFs. It's just some manufacturers have met the standards, the mass-based standards, without using DPFs. And then also, I just wanted to flag Jenna Latt is the manager of our off-road control section. And so she's the manager leading development of the Tier 5 standards. I just wanted to give some context, and she was chiming in there.
Thanks, Kim.
Yeah.
Thank you. And I guess I wanted to just ask about your definition of available. The fact that somebody makes a piece of equipment that's uh, zero emission doesn't necessarily mean it's going to meet the duty cycle that's required on some of the jobs that you're talking about. I mean, my understanding, again, talking to my contractors, is that a great deal of this equipment that's available is what we would define as landscaping equipment. It's pretty small, light duty, not necessarily capable of performing for an 8 to 12 hour duty cycle in a day. That being number one. And number two is the availability of electricity for the recharging this equipment at a lot of these construction sites, which tend to be remote. And electricity is usually the last thing that's brought to the site. So, and I know that I read that somebody's designed a loader, I think, that you can switch out the batteries, and they claim 10 minutes or something, but it still requires you to get the battery charged somewhere. So I guess the question is what's your definition of available, and does it include being able to meet a basic duty cycle for a construction site?
Sorry about that. Thanks for the question. Available would still need a little work on exactly finishing that definition. However, what I can tell you is we're looking at it from the perspective, the current concept is it's available as a zero emission equipment, as essentially a one for one or a like for like equivalent. So if you've got a um, Case makes a backhoe. They've got a version that's electric and they've got a version that is internal combustion. The internal combustion apparently can run about 8 hours on the one single fuel tank of fuel. The zero emission apparently can run about 8 hours on one charge. If you rent these, my understanding is the uh, rental provider or leasing agency will provide the charging equipment that goes with it. The charging equipment is frequently, as I've been told, is 110, can be pulled in on temp power. Most construction sites, when you're dropping a trailer, there's temp power there as well. Things like that. But I don't have complete parameters completely defined yet for available, but that gives you a general idea of what we're looking at as available. Is it available as a comparable piece of equipment, but in zero emission model? Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I guess so. I'm still trying to figure out, what this, I mean, I'm assuming when you say 35% of the equipment as zero emission, is that of the fleet or is the fleet that's going to be at the job site? And I ask that because, a lot of this equipment that's the zero emission probably doesn't go to a job site. It's something that might be used at their it might be, a loader or something that stays at one place. It doesn't go somewhere else, um, because it's easier for them to have the charging equipment, everything at a site where they might be loading gravel or put something of that sort, and they keep it at the site. It doesn't go to a job site, so it's that while it's reflected in the total makeup of their fleet, it's not the fleet that's going to be used on a job site. And so how do you account for that in this calculation?
So Michael, I would say keep our webpage tabbed and check in from time to time to see how we're advancing, how things are going. Um, it, Feel free to send me questions along the way, anything like that. Right now, the intent was to utilize available to be sensitive to the fact that sometimes there just isn't equivalent equipment out there. So if we're looking at a fleet of construction equipment, we only want to be considering available as the ones that have a zero emission equivalent out there. So that was the intent, is trying to be sensitive to fleets, to awarding bodies, to lead agencies, make sure that this is a doable program.
And
But if
just
you
to
wouldn't mind,
clarify,
just
I think the most recent thing that Mike was asking was whether we were envisioning this as a fleet-based recognition program or project-based. As staff worked on coming up with this concept, we honestly considered both, where what we're proposing now and what we think would work best is having it be a project-based recognition. And that way, somebody that's paying for a project, somebody that's doing a CEQA analysis of a project could point to these parameters as like, a requirement or something that they require for any project they're going to fund. But we welcome feedback if people think that we should be looking at it a different way.
Yeah, I guess I don't know that I have a specific recommendation, but I think when you look at a fleet, like indoors, a lot of that equipment may never leave a specific site. It may not go to a job site. So I don't know how you, again, like I said, I don't know how you account for that. And I think you need to recognize, this has been an incredibly costly exercise to move the construction fleet from where it was in 2007 to where it is today. And it's this equipment is very expensive, and it's for in an industry that you only get the work if you're the lowest bidder. So the fleets have long-term plans as to how they were going to transition and how they're going to get there. And I see this as sort of maybe upsetting that apple cart a little bit, and that they're now, you're now saying, well, you gotta do it differently than you had planned on it, and the schedule that had been laid out under the off-road rule. Um, and 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 they've budgeted how they're going to transition their fleet and how they're going to replace older equipment with newer equipment. And like I said, it's very costly. It's not the business model for most construction companies to buy new equipment. It never has been. So this is a whole new experience for them to have to buy brand new stuff, which is incredibly expensive.
yeah.
And they only get a job if they're the lowest bidder. So you can't load up on this equipment too quickly, or your price becomes non-competitive in this environment. So, um,
Mike, Michael, I appreciate your feedback. I do want to make sure everyone gets a chance to speak. I will just say, please, my email is there. Feel free to send me any questions you've got. And keep in mind that this is voluntary. This isn't a reg. We're trying to assist awarding bodies, lead agencies that already are making commitments on how to do it. We'll be creating a way for them to do that. But Yeah, really appreciate your feedback. Thank you.
Okay, we're going to take some questions from the Q&A. Our first question is from Maria Quintero. She types, Maria, located in the Central Valley, business owner. When you ask for feedback, who are you seeking feedback from? Can we be a part of this initiative?
Yes. Short answer, yes, Maria, sorry. We'd love to have your participation, love to have your feedback. Um, no one is too small or too big. It can be a community, it can be a business leader, it can be anybody who would like to contribute to this effort so that we can be as successful as we possibly can.
Maria follows up with, there is no unmute button. Maria, if you want to make a comment added to the discussion, please raise your hand and then we will do the unmute process and then you'll see unmute option pop up. Okay, next our question comes from Jeff Wood. When will the clean off-road equipment list be available? Currently says page unavailable.
Yeah. I think we put a new link in the chat, so hopefully that should work. And maybe there was just a typo or something. And if you wouldn't mind trying again, and if you continue to have problems, just give me an email or the ccc@arb.ca.gov, and we'll be happy to follow up with you with the link.
Okay, great. Our third question is from Brandy Lewis, and she has a series of questions. Hello, I'm Brandy Lewis from Case Construction. For the public available database of zero emissions equipment, you referenced the clean off-road equipment list. Is that the same list for units eligible for the core financial incentives? I ask because we have some smaller models that are zero emission, but not on the core incentive database because they don't qualify based on motor power.
No, Brady, this is not a core list. Core is another list you could reference for sure, as far as what available equipment is out there, but we would welcome you to look at the advanced clean equipment list and let us know if there's equipment that you think should be on there that's zero emission.
Okay. The secondary question is for the machines that are not zero emissions, the remainder after the threshold, your example talked about using Tier 4 final with DPF products. Is this implying that a Tier 4 final unit without DPF would not be allowed to be in the contractor's fleet?
So, great question. I believe Kim just reminded us all that this is currently envisioned as a project-based program. So the contractor's fleet composition is not reflected in the program. It's what is on the project. So if the contractor wanted to bring in equipment from their fleet that has Tier 4 final with a DPF, that works. If they needed to lease that equipment, that is totally up to the contractor on how they satisfy the requirements for the project. But it is a project-based program, not fleet.
Okay, and then the final part of their question says, you talked about this as a voluntary program and you'll be publishing guidelines online. Who is the anticipated entity that would be implementing this program? Another state agency as part of their bid process for a construction project? Are municipal or other government entities expected to be using this program? What about private entities?
Yeah, Brady, another good question. So we have engaged with different awarding bodies, municipalities have reached out. There are folks out there that have put public statements for their organizations on their commitment to bringing zero emission equipment to construction sites. We're going to develop the guidance and then it is up to different entities to decide if they want to participate. We're not, again, this is not a regulation, so it's not going to be forced on anybody. We do anticipate there are several municipalities that have expressed an interest, so we do anticipate some of that. We also have heard from other organizations, private entities that are interested. But it is a voluntary program, so it is up to the awarding body or lead agency to decide to elect to utilize it.
Okay. And then we have a question from Steve Hurd. Is this program limited to projects funded by California state or local government? Is it required for state or local government funded projects?
Again, this is a totally voluntary program that is not required. But I would say this is an opportunity to highlight incentives. If your equipment was paid for by Carl Moyer program, for example, it was funded by an incentive program. As long as it's zero emission, it's going to satisfy part of the. It can be considered eligible equipment for your calculation on meeting the project conditions.
Okay, we have an anonymous attendee. If I have a job and 1/3 of my equipment is electric, will the grid be able to handle the power at nighttime? And will the electricity costs be more money for the job since we know the electricity at night costs more money?
I appreciate the question, but this isn't something I wouldn't have any job site specific answer for. This would be outside of my realm.
Okay. Emilia Michelle, is CARB considering allowing fleets to achieve 35% EV compliance by either horsepower or number of equipment pieces? This would allow for more flexibility for operators as the equipment market expands while still realizing similar overall emissions reductions.
Amelia, great question. And at this time, we're envisioning it as number of equipment to make it as easy as possible to implement this on a project. So at this time, we're not looking at a horsepower value. We're looking at it from an individual piece of a construction equipment.
I think we'd like feedback on that. We've definitely been considering it both ways. And so if folks have a suggestion for how we do that, we'd really welcome that. I also wanted to jump in a little bit on the question from anonymous attendee from 1033 who asked about, will the grid be able to handle the power? And I think, yes, it will. So as folks know, CARB has a number of mandatory programs. They're looking at quite dramatic increases in the number of battery equipment out there, both light duty cars, heavy duty trucks, off-road equipment like forklifts. And so there's a huge effort to sort of get charging infrastructure available for that. So yeah, and the magnitude of projects that would at least initially be using this voluntary California Clean Construction Program is unlikely to, tax the grid in a significant way. However, it's a really perceptive question, and I think as as the construction fleet that's considering bidding on a site, they need to consider, well, what's the location of the site? Is there a place to plug in for charging, or would I need to bring out some sort of like we were discussing earlier, some sort of generator with a battery and energy storage system, something like that. So it's definitely part of what fleets would need, or companies would need to think through before they commit to making a bid and saying, yep, I can for sure have 35% of my equipment out there as ZE. So appreciate the question.
Okay, we are going to David Harris. How is CARB planning to assist small contractors with this standard? As a small contractor, I don't have the ability to recapitalize my fleet to compete on projects with this program quickly, and I am concerned that we are going to see a lack of SBE participation in these contracts.
Sure, David, great question. And we did keep smaller businesses in mind when we were developing this. We engaged with them during our initial request for information. And that's also why we obviously reference incentives. But there's this is a voluntary program that awarding bodies and lead agencies can choose to implement. So it by no means every project from here moving forward is going to have this requirement. This is purely if the project um, desires to implement this program, then the conditions would be there, but it is not a requirement. This is not a regulation. Um, so appreciate the comment. And Kim, did you want to add anything to that?
Let me add, and this is in response to Mr. Harris. I think we would appreciate if you have suggestions, because like we would be really excited if we roll out this program and lots of local governments across the state start embracing it, and they're considering this when they're hiring fleets. Then that'd be great because we're getting emission reductions, we're getting more deployment of zero emission equipment. But we don't want to see the unintended side effect of suddenly small businesses are locked out of being able to compete for like public projects. And so I think it's a really excellent question you're asking. So if you can think about like, well, how do you think we should take that concern into account? Like, should we have a less stringent criteria for smaller contractors? Should we exempt them in some way? How should we account for that? Similar concerns came up back 2 decades ago when we developed the in-use off-road regulation, which again was a mandatory regulation, different from this, which is voluntary. But we ended up giving special considerations for small fleets, more time, less stringent requirements. So that is something we could consider here, and I think we'd really welcome folks' ideas on how, if we should do that, and how we could do that.
Okay. We have anonymous attendee. I manage a medium-sized fleet for a environmental construction company, and utilizing the fleet average calculator spreadsheet from Doors, my total fleet horsepower is 2,669, and all Tier 4 final engines are for off-road equipment and are considered back exempt. Would we still be held to the 35% minimum?
Yeah, so the 35% minimum is for zero emission equipment on the project site from the available equipment list. So for that project, there would still need to be zero emission equipment totaling at least 35% of the available equipment number for that project.
Okay. Casey Corliss. If some fleet units are high horsepower and others are low horsepower, won't some people be motivated to just replace the low HP units with electric to meet the 35% threshold?
Casey, yes, thank you for this question. We are trying to create a program that will be effective and be widely adopted, hopefully. With that in mind, keep in mind that this is a project-based program, not fleet-based. So while somebody could certainly replace a smaller piece of equipment instead of a larger piece of equipment, there are still benefits to that piece of equipment being replaced. So we're still realizing an opportunity to replace a diesel piece of equipment, construction equipment, with a zero emission piece of equipment. Would be nice if everybody just went with the biggest, dirtiest, oldest equipment out first and replaced it. But we are trying to make this a easily adaptable project-based program.
But I do want to solicit ideas from folks because there's pros and cons to doing it both ways, right? So there's maybe it's simpler to do it by count of equipment, but it might be more proportional to emission benefit if we did it by horsepower. I saw someone in the Q&A suggest maybe you let the fleet choose which criteria they want to use. If you hit 35% by number or by horsepower, that would count. That could be a cool idea. So definitely request folks' ideas and thoughts on how best we could structure this.
Okay, we're going to go back to raise hand questions. I have Grant Stickney. Please unmute and let us know the organization you represent. We look forward to your comments.
Marjorie, are we having technical difficulties?
We're going to move on to Angela Clapp. Hi, Angela. Could you please state your organization? I will unmute you. We look forward to your comments. Oh, her hand went down while I said that. Okay. Oh, okay.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, I'm Angela Clapp. I'm with the Port of Oakland Environmental Programs and Planning Department, and we have been looking at ways to incentivize zero emission equipment for our construction projects and are currently undertaking a study to look at that. And wanted to give you guys the feedback, and we'll continue to do that as we finalize this report. But you know, for I would suggest that you take a look at different types of construction projects because for heavy duty, stuff, just because there might be a type of excavator, there's not necessarily the ones that will do the work needed for some of the heavier duty projects to meet that 35%. So we're looking at ways to incentivize that through the bid process, maybe like points or something like that. But just having a 35%, goal, to me, that seemed I'd be concerned that bidders would just add a bunch of light duty stuff that not isn't necessary to the project in order to meet that. And that, there's not going to be, even if there's somebody that manufactures some of this equipment, even on the heavier duty side, that doesn't mean it is to market, available for renting. The small business question, I think, is that this will certainly, cut, or it'll favor larger firms because they have the capacity to, use this equipment in a larger footprint, and purchase it. So I'll just say that there are some concerns on, the availability and feasibility for the equipment for that 35%, and then the small business side of things.
Angela, I'm super happy to see your name come up and to hear your comments. So Angela, actually, she and I engaged at the ACT Expo where she shared some insights and we were talking about some other challenges that could be anticipated. So appreciate your attendance, appreciate the question. We'll keep working on it. I think your concern is valid. I think it has already been mentioned by other commenters as well. The concern that you bring in a bunch of small stuff that could replace the diesel equivalent, but it's all just on the smaller end. And um, we would love to get additional have this discussion continue and be able to see different ways we can try to address that and ensure that we get the best results we could. We do think that this is feasible. Recognizing that available equipment helps to achieve that feasibility, in that when there is equipment that is leasable, rentable, purchasable, some sort of procurement process available for it, that it's counted. But if it's not, if it's a demonstration project, if it's a proof of concept that maybe you can't get a hold of or something like that, that's not considered, that would not count against, that would not be considered part of the available. If you can get it, then it could. But if we're creating the opportunity to use zero emission equipment, we want to get the most bang for the buck for what's actually available out there. And like I said, I think we would really appreciate if you continued sharing your thoughts and working with us, because you've been really great about providing feedback to date. So we'll keep working on this, and hopefully you'll work with us on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Angela. Next, we're going to go to Clayton Miller. Hi, Clayton. Please unmute. Let us know the organization you represent. We look forward to your comments.
Yes, hi, good morning. Clayton Miller with the Southern California Contractors Association. And I guess the question I have is, just thinking about this program is going to be would be voluntary. My question is, how would having a fleet that would meet whatever the criteria ends up to be, which I guess 35% is being talked about right now is EV, how does that get quantified in terms of emission reductions versus what would have been just a regular fleet? I guess just say regular fleet. So how do you quantify that, and what sort of bid preference would the contractor that has met that criteria, how does that get reflected in how the lead agency or the project owner, um, awards that? Like what kind of bid preference? And then I guess my last question, that's just all part of that process, is, um, in a case where a contractor needs to maybe lease or rent, as Mike Lewis mentioned when he was speaking earlier, that it's the lowest bidder that wins. However, if a contractor needs to lease and rent equipment to get a bid preference, that typically costs more than operating a piece of equipment they already own. So, is there any estimate that this is going to increase the costs for projects, and is that going to be something that somehow gets weighed against what the emission reduction benefit is, or how's this all going to work? Um, and maybe that's a question for local agencies, but what kind of direction are they going to get out of from this proposal? Is that going to be something that gets addressed as well? Thank you.
Thank you, Clayton. That's a lot of good questions. We'll start with bid preference. This is like you mentioned, this is voluntary. So each agency, awarding body, whoever is incorporating this into the final project conditions, would decide how they're going to recognize it as in points, what the preference is, how it's done, how it's recognized. That is up to them. We're going to say what implementation guidance looks like, but we're not going to determine or say it has to be done a certain way. And as far as quantification, this is a non-quantifiable recognition voluntary program. So we're not trying to quantify the emission reductions. for this one at this time. And then leasing or renting. So the California High-Speed Rail program, we mentioned they had a early Fresno bid proposal out there, and they shared the different equipment on their anticipated equipment list, along with the electric version lease estimate for a 4-week lease of electric and of diesel. The variations between those for like a skid steer, telehandler, compact excavator, wheel loader, different equipment on this particular project, just as an example, it varied. Sometimes the electric was more, sometimes the electric was actually less, depending on the equipment. So we think that the equipment, the electric equipment that's going to be, or the zero emission equipment that's going to be out there available for lease, can be identified by the awarding body or lead agency and help the contractors in their ability to bid. But again, that's up to the awarding body and the lead agency to decide how they're going to implement the program for their particular project.
Okay, so that is all for raised hand and discussion questions. We're going to go back over to the written Q&A portion. Jeff Wood, also zero emission equipment off-road reg page not found either. Hi, Jeff. I think that's been resolved in the chat. So please go to the chat and those links should work. And then we have anonymous. Yes.
Marjorie, I did want to just chime in that we went back and tested the links that are in the presentation too, and they do work. So we think it must be something on Mr. Wood's end. So please try again. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, anonymous attendee. Will the regulation prohibit the use of charging electric equipment with an engine-driven generator?
Yeah, thank you for that. We obviously would not want diesel generators powering all the electric equipment. That is something where we would love to have additional feedback, work with folks who are interested in making this program effective in maybe how we construct that guidance to encourage battery storage systems, electric solutions. Yeah, so would appreciate and welcome feedback on how to best address that.
Next, we have Matt Maloof. Have you considered proper incident management during infrastructure construction projects to reduce the amount of smog being emitted while vehicles are idling in traffic backup?
I'm not sure I fully understand what you're asking, Matt. Does anyone want to take a crack at this and maybe thinks they understand the question better than I am?
Maybe Mr. Maloof could raise his hand and explain more. It sounds like this is like thinking of another way to get emission reductions that could occur due to a construction project, like if it causes a bunch of like a big traffic jam and then everyone's idling. So we hadn't considered recognizing any like best management practices to reduce like traffic impacts. But yeah, if somebody has a suggestion for something we should build in, we're certainly open to considering anything.
Okay. Next, we have Mercedes Weimers. Hello, this is Mercedes Weimers from Cummins. My question, can you please expand more on the incentives for participants? To Mike's point, the lowest bidder typically gets the job if using more expensive zero emission equipment increases the amount a company can bid. are there incentives that can be offered to counter that increased costs?
Mercedes, thank you for the question. Um, I would I would suggest that if the contractor or if the awarding body or lead agency is making the program part of their conditions, then all the bidders would be bidding under the same conditions. So it should maintain the competitiveness and competitive process because everyone's bidding under the same conditions. You couldn't have a purely diesel fueled fleet bid on a project that incorporates this program. So, because yeah, that would be an unfair advantage. They'd be the lowest bidder potentially, but they wouldn't be bidding on the same conditions. So, the way it's constructed right now is intended to uh, preserve that competitiveness by subjecting everyone to the same project conditions.
Mercedes did follow up and said, Clayton asked my questions. Thank you. You may disregard mine. Okay. And then our next question is from Angela Clapp. Maybe this also corresponds with her comments earlier. Has this program considered the impact to small businesses? By design, new and expensive equipment is more likely to be feasible to purchase by larger firms that have multiple locations.
Yeah, I think we addressed that already with her live answer.
Okay, and then her second one was, what happens if firms just add a bunch of unnecessary light duty ZE that isn't used extensively in the project to meet the 35%? I think that was also addressed.
Yeah, I would just add, obviously, Angela, again, reiterating, would love to continue the conversation with you. But I think also to your point, awarding bodies and lead agencies can also take that into consideration when they're evaluating the proposals. So I think there is additional flexibility in that way as well.
Um, to end her discussion, she said, will you publish your response to feedback as part of the finalization of this framework?
I can tell you that this informational session is being recorded and we will post the recording after the event. Kim?
In addition, the point of having this discussion is to take our proposal and refine it and listen to people. So we certainly will be posting, a revised proposal and possibly, having further discussions and stuff. So definitely please keep talking to us if you don't think we've hit the mark.
Okay. We have our question from anonymous attendee. Is this program about just sharing list of equipment, or these equipment will actually be planned to use somewhere? Is it just to recognize that these, for example, 30 contractors have qualified as clean construction contractors, a reward them? What is the purpose here?
So thank you for this question. And I would let you know this is an easy one. The intent is to get to zero emission equipment on construction projects, utilized on construction projects, replacing diesel equipment equivalents on construction projects. This is not, that is part of why it's project based, as currently envisioned as project based, as opposed to fleet based. We're looking for this equipment to be in use.
Yeah, that follows up their secondary question. It says, please say more on project base and not fleet base. Can you give an example?
Sure. So again, going back to the California High-Speed Rail project, they put out a condition of their proposal that said um, the bids needed to be for the zero, incorporating the zero emission equipment. So for that particular project, and that is done outside of us, it is just a reference or example project. We're not affiliated with the project at all. But where they put out the conditions that said the equipment needed to be zero emission. So everyone that bid on that needed to supply a proposal that incorporated and met the conditions that were required. So if a fleet had a composition, whatever their composition is, it would not automatically guarantee them consideration for the proposal. It's what equipment from that fleet the project would gain. So just having the equipment in your fleet, perhaps you've got rollers, all electric rollers in your fleet, but the project does not require any rollers. Everything else in your fleet perhaps is a diesel. Then you would want to look at other alternatives to be able to bid on that job, potentially leasing, renting, coordinating with another subcontractor that has that particular equipment. Whatever your solution is to be able to satisfy the conditions for meeting that bid requirement.
Maybe I can elaborate a little bit. So as we thought about designing this program, we initially thought, hey, we've got doors data, like all the construction fleets in California are already reporting to us. We already have Zeta provisions in the off-road regs. So maybe we should just do this like rewarding or recognizing fleets that already have a lot of zero emission equipment. And as we kind of, we did a request for information, we talked to people, we talked internally, talked to CEQA staff, we realized, I think this is more likely to have a greater impact if we look project by project. So we aren't thinking of looking to see, construction in company A, what in total do you own in the state of California and what percent of that is ZE? Instead, we're really looking at, for this project that's coming up next year, if the person who's paying for it chooses to participate in this, they would say, hey, in order to bid on this project, you need to give us your equipment list, look at of that, which types of equipment have ZE models, and then for the ones that there are available, over a third, so 35%, you need to actually be committing to use ZE. So that's what we mean by project-based rather than fleet-based.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you, Kim. We have a question from George Lynn. Are there any requirements, limitations on how the zero emission equipment are charged? For example, if equipment are charged with the generator using a diesel engine with a DPF, is this an issue for the program?
George, thank you for the question. So as it's proposed right now, that would be a condition evaluation made by the awarding body or lead agency. We would encourage charging infrastructure that minimized emissions, but that is currently envisioned as being a condition that would be applied by the awarding body.
Okay, anonymous attendee writes, I may have missed this, but will there be a certificate for compliance for this voluntary program?
All right, Anonymous, we really appreciate this one because this is something we would love to hear more feedback on how CARB might help to recognize projects that participate. So, is it an award? Is it a certificate? Is it, how is this going to be implemented as far as recognizing projects that are successful in implementing a minimum of 35% of the construction equipment being zero emission, and then the rest being Tier 4 final with DPF? How do we recognize that? That has not been finalized, and we would welcome any and all feedback, suggestions, and comments on
Okay, we have a three-part question from Scott Gallick. Scott Gallick, Port of Long Beach. The first question is, has CARB considered a phased approach with percentages changing over time for this program?
It's an interesting idea, but no, we at this time did not envision a phased approach, but that is certainly something that could be considered, perhaps like making that minimum threshold more stringent over time. Um, that's a possibility for sure. But right now we're just looking at the single minimum threshold.
Okay, question two. Will CARB be able to provide drafts specification language for consideration by lead agencies?
I think I can comfortably say yes. That's the intent, is to be able to um, work together with interested parties to try to draft the guidance.
Okay, and then number three, did California High Speed Rail provide to CARB any recommended performance metrics for asset management tracking?
Not with regard to this program. Um, no.
Okay, that concludes those questions. Next, we're going to Amelia Michelle. Will projects be required to update list if equipment changes? Some projects may be multiple years or multiple phases.
Yeah. So the larger a project, the more complex a project, the more likely you're going to run into change orders or other challenges that might impact that anticipated equipment list. Um, that that can be foreseen. So the idea currently is that as projects are impacted by change orders or other project conditions that necessitate a change in equipment, that they would adjust the equipment list accordingly. Most projects are already going to be maintaining their equipment on site on a list anyway. They manage their fuel, they manage their charging, they um, manage their operating time and all of that. So they're already going to have a list of equipment that's on project site. So it was thought that this would be something that could be done, could be adjusted and done in a way that minimizes additional recording requirements.
Okay. And then anonymous attendee writes, how does this apply to electric forklifts?
Sure, if a project incorporated electric forklift and they incorporated this program, or if a project had incorporated this program and had electric forklifts that I believe would just count as equipment. Um, there's a lot of different types of equipment out there. You've got front end loaders. This is not equipment specific other than construction equipment, 25 horsepower or greater.
Okay. We are almost through with Q&A. If anyone still has a question out there, please post it. This is from Todd Bloomstein. Hi, Todd Bloomstein here. Bloomstein and Bloomstein. I'd suggest the state look at ways to incentivize on-site EV usage as opposed to a clean construction equipment designation. It sounds like the idea CARB has is similar to the LEED program for buildings. Another idea is to financially incentivize bidders that meet the EV equipment percentage. The incentive could be a contract bonus, similar to what some contracts have for bonuses that finish early.
That's an interesting idea, Todd. Thank you for the question. Thank you for the suggestion. That's I had not thought about trying to provide a bonus. I'm not sure the state can provide a bonus. I know I don't get a bonus. Um, but whether or not that's something that the awarding body or the lead agency wanted to do, or how they recognize the different fleets that provided the bids, I think that might be the route to incorporate the suggestion that you've got. But thank you for the question. Thank you for the suggestion, and please stay. This is an interesting concept. So if you've got others like it, we would welcome your continued participation.
Okay, we are wrapping up. We have a lot of questions from anonymous attendee. You can always raise your hand and we can have a discussion. Okay, will the regulation indicate how many hours a unit must be used on the project?
Okay, so this one is appreciated because it gives me an opportunity to remind everybody this is not a regulation. This is a voluntary recognition program, um, and it is not a regulation. There is no plans to make it a regulation, and hope that kind of reminds everybody where we're at with this.
Then they wrote, if the job site has a lot of mobile truck cranes, how will the job be able to implement the 35% cranes are not electric now and they're under uh, the truck and bus regulation?
Okay, so awarding bodies and lead agencies would want to reserve utilization of this program to projects that are applicable. So if there is a specific um, type of equipment that's necessary at a particular job site and that is not electrified or has no options available for that, again, referencing the fact that this program looks at available zero emission equipment. So if there is no zero emission equipment available, then that project would not be a good candidate for this program. That said, my understanding is that there are um, zero emission cranes available, but I think that's really not what your question is about. Um, but like I said, this program would not be applicable for every project under every condition. It would be specific to those that have zero emission equipment availability. I feel like we
Um,
might have lost
if
Mark.
the, sorry about that. If the job site has a lot of,
Yeah, I think we actually already answered this one about forklifts. It's equipment based. So I think we can skip down to Michael Lewis.
okay. Michael Lewis writes, can we get access to the doors data that you looked at to develop this program?
Um, there is a public facing side of doors um, that is accessible. I think we could probably put that link if you're interested in what's available indoors.
I'd suggest that we sit down with Kayak and we can go over their questions and we can share. We're not able to share like confidential data that's indoors, but we could surely share like aggregate analyses like we did reported to doors, how much Z stuff do people already own? So we could share what we've seen there. But again, like Holmes mentioned, they might have other stuff they haven't reported to doors that's ZE.
Okay. Todd Bloomstein writes, follow up. Caltrans does include bonuses in some of its contracts. Check out the I-5 boat section project in Sacramento. Thank you for
Thank
your
you, Todd.
comment.
Yeah, thanks for sticking around too.
George Lynn, or another alternative could be to offer free fuel or electricity for zero emission equipment.
That's a great idea too. Also, something that a project awarding body or lead agency could incorporate, right? That would be completely project oriented and project based, but that could be something somebody might want to offer. Very
And
creative.
thank you. Our final question is from Angela Clapp. How should lead agencies determine if a project is applicable at the CEQA stage?
I am going to try, Angela, very hard not to mess up this answer. Um, we are working with some folks to create draft language that that would allow this program to be utilized as a CEQA mitigation measure. But at this point, I'm not able to definitively say this program can be used as a mitigation measure um, addressing air quality. We're working on it. Um, so I appreciate the question, but I'm not sure I'm going to be able to offer a whole lot more than that at this time. We're working on it, trying to make it as robust as possible, working with the governor's office of land use, trying to make sure that we're doing whatever we can to make this resource CEQA mitigation eligible. But that's where we're at in the process at this time. Kim, did you want to? It looked like you. No. Okay. So hopefully that helps, Angela.
So that concludes all the raised hand questions and Q&A discussion of this webinar.
Well, thank you everyone who stuck around. Thank you for everyone for all the great feedback. We will be posting this. Thank you, Kim, for the assistance. Appreciate your support. So for those that don't know, she is my boss's boss and has been instrumental in helping us kind of stay on track to getting this towards a finished product. Please feel free to check the web page out from time to time. California Clean Construction under the CARB parent page. We'd be happy to have you share any thoughts, feedback, anything that comes to mind later. But appreciate everyone's attendance and participation, and super kudos to everyone who supported this effort. So thank you to the behind the scenes.
Thank you. This concludes our webinar. It was recorded and should be posted soon.